Hello, hi, great day. For today's topic, we have Edwin Ray Guthrie's contiguity theory of learning. But before we jump right into the lesson of the contiguity theory of learning by Edwin Ray Guthrie, we will first know who is the one who came up or who is the one who found this kind of theory. So Edwin Ray Guthrie is a behavioral psychologist that first worked to be a philosopher and a mathematics teacher, but switched to psychology when he reached the age of 33. He used up most of his life by being a full-time professor at the University of Washington, and then he retired but still retained his title as a professor in psychology. Edward Ray Guthrie is widely known for his contiguity learning theory. So Edwin Ray Guthrie was born in Lincoln, Nebraska on January 9, 1886, died in 1959, and published Psychology and Learning, 1935. Collaborated with Horton on Stereotypical Behavior of Cats in a Puzzle Box, 1936 to 1939, and revised the Psychology of Learning. So it's possible to explain all learning phenomena by using one principle, and all learning theories can be assumption of us trying to understand rules in which stimuli and responses are related. So it means that different kinds of theories fall into grasping the idea of understanding relations between oneself, society, and how we say something in response to a series of events or things that draws out specific functional reaction. And there are theories generated by people like Edward Thorndike and Ivan Pavlov that were too intricate or too hard to understand. And in their place, yes, we have Edwin Ray Guthrie, and he came up with one law of learning, the law of contiguity. So in this slide, we have the law of contiguity. It is a combination of a stimuli which has tagged along with a movement on its own repetition and showing a tendency to be followed by that movement again. So in this next slide, we have a picture, an example of a teacher silencing the class. So the teacher creates a stimulus of "be quiet, class," and the students responded in silence. Every time the teacher says "be quiet" is an example of law of contiguity, because if the teacher says "be quiet," we immediately think that this teacher is mad at us for being noisy, since the two often happens one after the other. So the law of contiguity, well, basically on the explanation, if you did something in any kind of particular circumstances or setting, the following time you are in that situation, you will have the urge to do the same thing again. And that's for the law of contiguity. And the next slide is, yes, it can be also considered as contagious conditioning, because every time the students hear "be quiet," the students develop an association between silence and the classroom. And here we have contiguity theory. In this kind of theory, punishments or rewards have no remarkable effect in learning, since they take place after the cooperation between stimulus and response has been formed or is done. So unlike the behaviorist theory by Bert Frederick Skinner, which focuses on success, rewards, and punishments, the law of contiguity has no rewards and punishments, because before we can even react to things or happenings, the response and stimulus already take place, and it's too late before you can make a reaction. And in addition to Edwin R. Guthrie's one law of learning, Guthrie said that you could learn anything in one try, and this is where the one trial learning principle can be expressed. So in one trial learning, a stimulus pattern that gains its accompanying strength on the instance of its first matching in response. A single matching of a response and stimulus cannot be strong or stronger by overtime exposure or repetition to a stimulus. So here we have an example, a picture of a child touching a hot frying pan. So in the picture above, we have a child who is attracted to a hot frying pan and touches it. The pain will make the child to withdraw from the hot frying pan while still looking at it. The response of the child to withdraw from the hot frying pan becomes attached to the side of the hot frying pan and replace or change the child's approach response to the hot frying pan. So one trial learning is a form of learning that can be learned by experiencing a particular event or things for the first time, and it is produced by pairing a neutral stimulus and an unconditioned stimulus. So in this picture, so if a child sees a hot frying pan again, the child will be likely to avoid the hot frying pan rather than to approach it. And since learning happens in one trial, we can also repeat the same things we did before if the situations or conditions are being encountered again. And this is where the recency principle will be explained. So, the recency principle expresses that the current or the last stimuli an individual remembers will form association with an action or movement than the previous stimuli on the first thing an individual studied. So in this picture, we have an example of a child that struggles to memorize a list of words. So the picture above represents a child who is struggling to remember the list of words he memorized. From the 10 words he memorized on the list, only the last 2 words on the list is the words that he remembered. He remembered the last 2 words he memorized because we people are more likely to recall words from the list that we studied last. So, as I said a while ago, we have the chance to repeat the same things we did before if the conditions or situations are to be re-encountered again. Well, to simplify the explanation, the word recency from the recency principle comes from the root word recent, which means having a particular event or thing happen not long ago. So the tendency to remember a piece of information is the most written one. But how about the 8 words that the child had forgotten? So this is where Guthrie's concept of forgetting comes into play. So forgetting, this can be compared like one trial learning. Forgetting also happen in just one take or trial, in the presence of a stimulus pattern when an old movement is replaced by a new movement and forgetting takes place. So forgetting, the theory of forgetting is the superlative extent of retroactive inhibition. And Guthrie states that forgetting completely blocks out old information to learn something new. And retroactive inhibition is the negative effect of any particular doing that follows memorization on the recalling of the memorized material. So in forgetting, so basically the theory of forgetting is to let go of the information and that is not important. And that piece of information is replaced by a more refined and detailed one. And retroactive inhibition, on the other hand, refers to the memory of something that is learned previously and is intervened by learning something that is new. When we learn something new, it interferes with what we already know or the previous knowledge that we had. But the next question is forgetting can be a habit? And for this next slide, we have the habit formation. So habits are learned behaviors in response to different kinds of doings, like the example that we have in the law of contiguity and contagious conditioning, where the teachers tell students to be quiet and the students develops the habit of being quiet if around in the school premises or in different settings that you are not supposed to make any sounds that can disturb anyone. The stimulus is now responding to different conditions, becoming into an overall habit. So in this slide, we have a picture here, an example of a man vaping. So vaping can be a strong habit because the response or the urge to vape has taken place of so many purposes, like being cool while vaping, or using it to fidget, to kill time, or to turn your attention to vaping and avoiding stress and anxiety. A person who is vaping will tend to use a vape when encountered again, or if a person has nothing to do. And this is for the habit formation. Well, if an individual keeps repeating a behavior, and we can say that behavior stands for stimulus, then we can say that learned behaviors can be a habit if it's in repetition. But can a repeated behavior be broken? So in this next slide, we have habit breaking. So Edwin Guthrie not only studied the concept of habit formation, but habit breaking as well. Guthrie devised three methods of breaking habits. So a threshold. In order for an individual to break a habit, that individual must be exposed to a weak stimuli and gradually increasing that stimuli strength to the point of what can an individual tolerate. So in threshold, we will expose weak stimuli to a leveling mode or to practice weak stimuli to make them stronger from time to time. So in then so in this next slide, we have a picture here, an example of a teacher that increases the amount of time a student sit. So it is a bad habit of a student if that student cannot sit still while studying. The teacher will try to increase the amount of time the students have to sit. By forcing them to sit still, the weak stimulus of a student gradually increasing to become strong. The students slowly break the bad habit of unable to sit still while in class or studying from having the capability to sit still longer for hours. And for the next slide, we have fatigue. So Edwin Guthrie sees this approach by forcing an individual to repeat undesirable response in the presence of a stimulus. So continuation with the example above with the students with no rest. If the students are unable to sit still, even if they are trying to, the teacher would make them run or clean non-stop until they have no longer the power to do so. So stimulus until fatigue will happen if the students love to run and clean. The lingering passive of a fatigue can change the student's behavior. So in the last slide, we have incompatible response. In this kind of method, it involves the presence of a stimuli, but having an individual incapable of making a response with the unwanted response. So using again the first example above, a teacher might make the students write and talk at the same time if the students are too noisy, and we know it's difficult and impossible to do so. Since writing and talking is incompatible with each other, the resistance leads to silencing the students, which the teacher desires. So before we end this lesson, My conclusion about Edwin Ray Guthrie's work appears to be forgotten in education. Well, because we have different kinds of theories in the world, like classical conditioning and operant conditioning, but we rarely talk about contiguous conditioning. So I will end this lesson, and that's all for this topic. Thank you for listening.